What do most Fortune 500 executives have in common? They learned important lessons on the fields and courts of their high school and collegiate sports teams. This is true for both men and women. Ernst & Young found that a whopping 94% of women holding a C-suite position played sports. Their wins and losses shaped their habits and who they would become. Join me on my journey to sit with some of the brightest executives in the world as we discuss how sports shaped their professional trajectory in life. I'm your host, Don Yeager, and this is Corporate Competitor Podcast. With me for today's episode is the Senior Director of Synnex Corporation, Matt Karst. With operations in more than 40 countries, Synnex is an industry leader in IT distribution and customer care outsourced services. Matt brings more than 30 years of experience in the technology industry, leading successful sales organizations. Recently, I discovered the lessons he learned as a three-sport athlete in high school before becoming a member of the baseball team at the University of Miami.
Culture starts at the very top. They instill this culture that everybody on the team has to be looking out for each other. Everybody on the team has to be committed. They've got to be accountable, and they got to take actions every single day that are good for the team versus a self-serving gain or a self-serving attitude.
Matt, thank you so much for joining us, and we're so grateful to have you here teaching us so we can teach others.
Don, thank you for inviting me. It's great to see you out in California recently at the Innovation Forum, and our company has had you speak at multiple events and just thoroughly enjoy your messages as well. So really appreciate you having me on today.
Well, I appreciate it. And as I said, I'm looking forward to learning today. In our subject matter, we're going to take this first half and we're going to talk about some of the things you were able to achieve in your athletic side of your life. And then that second half, we're going to get to how those lessons learned on fields affect the way you lead today. So let's jump right into this idea. You know, at Angola High there in Indiana, you played three sports, right? Football, basketball, baseball. But in today's world, we seem to be telling every kid to specialize, to get in and just do one thing, do it all year long, 10,000 hours, all of that stuff. What kind of advantage do you think you actually gained by having played three different sports?
Well, first of all, Don, I agree. The landscape of today's high school sports has certainly changed over the past few decades. And candidly, I'm not sure that I could even make three sports today in today's world environment. These young men just seem so fast, so much stronger, larger, bigger than I recall. But I recall just loving staying busy. And I can't even remember not going to a practice, either before school, after school, sometimes both, for my entire high school years, all 4 years. I felt that was a huge advantage for me because, well, first of all, it kept me busy, kept me focused, and I got to interact with some really diverse and different coaches and broadened how many teammates that I really got to meet and develop a friendship with. Friday nights under the lights for a football game was so much different in an environment and how you have to perform in that environment. That was so much different than like a packed weekday gym for a basketball game. And then, of course, the baseball field, you know, where never a packed house. So playing in front of different types of environments was, I think, a huge advantage for me. And I mentioned the coaches. I mean, I was really fortunate that I had some great coaches throughout high school and beyond. For example, my freshman basketball coach was a gentleman named Al Rhodes. He ended up guiding Warsaw to the state championship in the 80s. And that's back in the movie Hoosiers. You might remember every school, no matter your size, didn't matter if you're a small Hickory or Angola, if you were going to advance, you had to go on and play everybody. And you had to play all the big Indianapolis schools or the big Fort Wayne schools or the South Bend, et cetera. So for Al to guide Warsaw and win a state championship, he is, by the way, today in the Indiana Basketball Hall of Fame. My varsity basketball coach was Basil Mawby, and he ended up coaching Connorsville High School to a state championship. number one in the 80s as well. And he's also in the Indiana Basketball Hall of Fame. Basil was known for baseball ball, really aggressive defense. So I was fortunate to learn from two really good basketball coaches. My football coach was Tom Saylor. Tom's also a co-author of Wave the Flag for Hudson High. He held the national high school record for the most consecutive wins of 72. He was featured in Sports Illustrated, and he was inducted in 91 into the Michigan Football Hall of Fame. So there's three coaches that are in Hall of Fames that I was very fortunate to have exposure to those coaches. And I thought it was a huge advantage playing year round, and because I got to meet so many different teammates. And from a small class, from a small high school, I really got to broaden my friendships.
And then I know over on the baseball side, your Connie Mack coach, Colin Lister, who you had mentioned to me in our pre-work, had such an enormous impact on you. And he's also quite the legend.
Yes, he was. He managed our Connie Mack Northern Indiana All-Star team, and it was called the Fort Wayne Comet at the time, which, interestingly enough, was also the name of the minor league hockey team that Colin owned and managed for 28 years.
Wow. And then I know Colin, he passed away in 2010, and when it was incredible obituary in the local paper, and so many former players wrote about him. But the theme of all of what they wrote about him as a leader and a coach wasn't about specific strategy. It was really about his personal generosity and his willingness to open up the many access points he had to each of you who played for him.
Absolutely. I mean, Colin influenced me in multiple ways. He was very approachable, first of all. He took a chance on me. I mean, I was the only person on that Fort Wayne All-Star team that came from an hour away from a small school. Every other teammate was really from the Fort Wayne larger school. So he took a chance on me, but he knew that if I was willing to drive to practices 2 hours, that I must love the game, almost like a fatherly figure to me. And he was just very generous man. Right before I was making a decision of where am I going to go to college, and I knew I wanted to play baseball, I was kind of leaning on Colin to help guide, and he took the time and he offered advice to me, and he made phone calls for me. He wrote a letter. He had a powerful network, so he knew somebody down in South Florida because it seemed to work. And I ended up in Coral Gables, Florida, 1,400 miles away. And I just remember when I was trying to make that decision, the words Colin told me that I never forgot. He said, "Matt, don't worry if you made the right decision, just go make the decision right."
Mm.
And those words have helped guide me in my business career too. You know, I'm not always looking over my shoulder because we all make a lot of decisions, and you just can't worry about whether you make the right one. You just got to go make it right.
Wow. Don't worry about making the right decision. Just make the decision right. I love that.
Absolutely.
So, you referenced it there. As you were looking to try to decide what to do, you could have gone several places to play, but he had this idea and recommendation, made a phone call or reached out for you to the University of Miami, a great baseball program with Ron Frazier, just an amazing coach. What a thing to be able to avail yourself of Coach Lister's network.
Absolutely. The time down in Miami was so memorable and amazing, especially for a kid from a small town in the Midwest. I got the opportunity to play on an AstroTurf field. At the time, there was only 3 of those that I was aware of in the entire United States. And I was an infielder. I was a second baseman. I was used to those rough, dirt, rocky infields of the Midwest. And you had to learn to just tough it out and get in front of balls. But on an AstroTurf field, man, my first few practices, I just felt invincible because you could get in front of anything and not worry about a bad hop. All I really had to learn was backspin and topspin. A baseball with topspin on AstroTurf, it really moves. But unfortunately, my time on the baseball team was really short. So it happened, unfortunately, with a broken hand. I was working hard. I was taught if you're really going to make a move in any athletic endeavor, you had to put in the time and the work. So I stayed after practice. It was getting dark. I was shagging some fly balls from outfielders, and they were making throws to second base. So I wanted to be their second baseman that stayed after practice and did that. And regretfully, I lost the ball in the lights. I didn't think that the outfielder was going to throw it because it was a really short fly ball, and he came charging in. I thought he was going to throw it to home plate, back to the batter, but no, he wheeled really quickly and threw it as hard as he could to second to make the throw. And I just caught a glimpse of it. And when I went down with my glove and hand, it hit no leather. It just hit my right thumb, which is my throwing hand, and it shattered it. It was game over for me. And, you know, when they have walk-ons and a long, long list of folks that are really trying to earn a spot, they just reload down there. And it was a tough time for me. I couldn't even hold a pen to take notes in class. But I learned a lot from that experience, and Colin's advice kept resonating, you know, make the decision right. So I just dug into school. I talked to my dad at length about it, and he said, you know what, you're down there for an education. So I just dug in with my studies, and I ended up on the dean's list and all A's that first semester. And I go, you know what, there might be a bigger plan for me. And I was really fortunate that very next spring, I met a grad student that wanted to hire me. He talked me into coming to work for him the following year. If I would come back my sophomore year, he would put me in a leadership role over like 20 other students. So I was just 19, and this guy trusted me. He was really my first boss, and I became very close friends with him at the U. I've maintained that friendship over many decades, and that boss is now the Clemson athletic director, Dan Radakovich.
Oh,
and I hold Dan in very high regard. I mean, for him to trust me and put me in a job that I had free room and board, and with my academic scholarships, it made a private university very, very affordable for my family. So I stuck it out for the rest of and ended up graduating magna cum laude and got my foot in the door at IBM right there in Coral Gables. So it's interesting how life takes those turns.
Isn't it? That's when you are making the decision right, when you see those things as opposed to imagining that you were robbed of something else. That's a mindset, and I love it. I also love your lesson there about the idea that to make a move, you have to do the extra work. I don't think that's a sports lesson. That's a life lesson that we should be teaching everybody around us.
Yep, I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. You know, many athletes push themselves beyond whatever might be their personal limitations because someone out there might have been a teammate, might have been a coach, might have been a family member, kind of inspired them to do so. Was there someone like that in your journey for whom you found yourself sort of playing?
I would have to say that my inspiration to play hard, work hard, and achieve goals would probably was from my father. I mean, I just wanted to make him proud. You know, I'd love to hear him brag about what I'm doing. And he pushed me for sure. And probably my other inspiration might have come from Pete Rose. Now, Pete certainly today has some challenges, and there's a lot of people that are on the fence with Pete Rose one way or the other. His gambling and his ban from baseball, but I'll tell you, no one can argue the way he played the game. And I was, you know, a Cincinnati Reds fan from a young age because my grandfather and my dad took me to my very first games at Crosley Field, and then my first World Series at Riverfront Stadium. And it was easy to be a Reds fan, by the way, in that era. They were the big red machine. They were rolling.
Right, yeah.
But Pete Rose, I just loved the way he played. I slid head first a lot. And then I did that because if it's good for Pete, it's going to be part of my game.
I love it.
So hustling was part of what I learned from Pete.
Yep, Charlie Hustle. Competitive fire is not one of those things that goes away, even for almost anyone I've ever worked with. I know you live in the Rocky Mountain state today of Colorado. And how do you keep that competitive fire alive for you today?
Well, I love downhill skiing, so I couldn't be in a better state for that. I mountain bike. I love golf, playing softball, but I'm a pretty aggressive downhill skier, and I just love that thrill of going really fast. It's the best workout that I enjoy. Again, mountain biking, and the only sport that I've really had to give up was softball. I played for 8 years here in Colorado, 3 leagues per year, 24 different leagues with the same group of guys. And we were all in our 30s, 40s, and 50-year-olds like me. And we were consistently beating younger teams, which irks the younger teams. But it was competitive. I loved it. But a couple of years ago, I had to give that up. I didn't quit. I was asked by my cardiologist to stop playing softball. And the reason I was asked by the cardiologist to stop is because I was diagnosed with a skipping of the heartbeat, which I think the medical term is bradycardia, which resulted in a really slow heart rate. Nobody knew why. They were first trying to figure out what was going on with my organs. Well, once all the CAT scans showed my organs were not the issue, they had me on the EKG machine, and I could tell by the look on my son and my wife's face. I couldn't see the monitor over the bed. They could, and they said it went down to 0. And that's a pretty scary time. And they put a pacemaker in and ran some cables to my heart. The bottom line is that all came out so successful, but the cardiologist
said no more softball.
No more softball, because if you take a hard line drive to your upper left chest, which I did plenty of times, he said, you're going to be in to see me long before you want to. So
right. 24 leagues. That's pretty good. I like that. That's pretty awesome.
Yes.
Now we're going to pivot. We love this pivot piece where we get to translate some of the lessons. You've already done a piece of that into how it's affected your leadership. You mentioned Coach Lister reaching out to Miami on your behalf, and that taught you a really big lesson that you shared with me that you still use today.
Yes. And that lesson that I learned from Colin, well, a couple lessons from Colin, because he was very influential. The first one was the power of networking. I never knew a man in Fort Wayne had such a broad network and influence of people and students and athletes that he had impacted over the years. And he had a very powerful network. This was long before the internet, but when he took that time and he reached out to his network, it really helped pave the way for me. So I learned early on that I needed to build a really powerful network, coast to coast, and try to keep those relationships alive and do it in a very meaningful, impactful way. And the second thing, again, and we talked about it, is that you got to make the decisions that you make right. Colin instilled that in me from an early age.
And then it's so important about building out a network, looking for ways that you can give in, and then maybe one day when necessary, you can actually ask or connect people together and change the trajectory of other lives. And Colin certainly did that for you. And then in college, I mean, you played for Ron Frazier. We talked about him, right? He was the wizard of college baseball. He was so good. What he created at Miami was a winning culture. And even though you were part of that baseball program for just that 1 year, I know that just being part of a winning culture shapes a lot of what you learn and what you expect from those who are in the culture you're growing to develop wherever it is that you move next. What did you learn about culture there that you might even use in your team building environments today?
Well, I learned that culture starts at the very top. So the top of the organization, no mistake, was Coach Frazier, and then his assistant, Skip Berkman, and all the coaches. They instilled this culture that everybody on the team has to be looking out for each other, and that there's no I in team. And I've taken that forward in what I've learned, because my time with them was so short, so I don't have a ton of stories to share with you about the baseball culture. But what I took forward, that everybody on the team has to be committed. They've got to be accountable, and they got to take actions every single day that are good for the team versus a self-serving gain or a self-serving attitude.
Yeah. And that's, even baseball is a sport where individual statistics play a big role in what people think about your skill set. And that's true in sales. It's true in so many other places of business. And yet when you see or can develop an environment where people will still make decisions that are good for the whole dynamic of the team changes.
Absolutely.
When you think through now your years of executive experience, what you're doing at Synnex and all the great work there, was there as you've gone through mergers and other things that have certainly challenged your professional life, is there a challenge from the athletics side that you leaned on, might have taught you something that you were able to use in the very long career you've now had in business?
Well, we spoke earlier about the broken hand. I mean, I had to take away from that experience. You have to have a plan B, and you have to move on, and you have to dig in, and you have to make the decision right. In my athletic career, I would probably think back to high school. We had a really good basketball team. I mentioned the Hall of Fame Indiana coaches that I worked for or played for. My senior year, I really wanted to start. I was 5'11", but our team was made up of 2 6'1" and 6'2" guards, and they went up from there, our forwards and our center. And all of them were, fundamentally sound. By the way, everybody in Indiana playing basketball at that time, you started at a very early age. So the fundamentals, the defense, the passing, the dribbling, and the shooting, a lot of good skills. So I had a really tough time breaking into that starting lineup. But my senior year, I really wanted to start, but those other 2 guards were so good and so skilled. And I had lots of thoughts about, am I wasting my time? Should I go just pack my gym bag and call it a day? And nobody likes riding the pine. But you know what? I stuck it out because I knew that I had a role with the team, and my role was to make them better. That is a role that some people need to play. So I figured that out and said, you know what? I got to make these other guards that are starting ahead of me better. And I knew by that I would also get better myself, and my time may come. Well, we won the sectional that time for the first time in 15 years at our tiny high school. We beat a lot of bigger teams, had a really good, successful 20-plus win season, but I never got a break in. Nobody got injured. Basil liked to play those other guards. But the lesson that I learned really resonated when I got called to the principal's office right after that basketball season and right before I was going to go out and start diving into baseball. Harry Kelly was our principal, and I hadn't been called to the office prior, so this was kind of a new experience. But he just sat me down and he said, hey, I recognize that you had a lot of options this year and you could have easily packed it in, but other people were watching. The younger players were watching, and you never quit. And that meant a lot to him. He just wanted to thank me for that by setting an example. So what I took from that experience, that challenge in my business career, is that, you know what, things aren't always going to work out. You're not always going to get the nod, but you have to persevere, and you got to build strong teams around you to elevate your game. But you also have to make sure that your team recognizes that it's all about the effort that you put in, and everybody has a role, and you just got to stick to it, and good things will happen eventually. So that's probably my best example.
No, that's great. And again, what a good one to be able to pass on to many folks that you've probably had a chance to mentor and coach professionally in your career. I know that in 2017, Synnex actually acquired the company you were working for. And sometimes in those mergers and those high-level acquisitions, there's friction, there's challenge, there's uncertainty. Anything that you might share with us that you took from previous learning, but how you kept your team positive, and maybe even some advice that you might give to others who might be going through something similar?
Sure. As a matter of fact, in my career, I've been through multiple acquisitions. And what I learned is you always want to be on the writing the check side of that equation, but that's not always in your control. But my advice to other listeners of yours, that you have to stay calm, and you have to always view that glass as half full in an acquisition or merger. There's going to be a lot of work, but I've always tried to make sure my teams knew that this is an opportunity. It's an opportunity to learn new things. You're going to meet new colleagues, which is going to expand that network that I have always instilled is really important to build. And it gives you a chance to prove your value. You have to prove that value to new people. So I've always led my sales teams, started decades ago, with a core base of 11 ground rules for success. And those 11 ground rules, they have to buy into, they got to understand it, or there's really not a really good spot on my team for them. And those 11 ground rules, I made sure that they knew that they're going to still apply, whether it's former company, which was called Westcon, a multi-billion-dollar distributor, and we got acquired by Synnex. But I let them know those core ground rules are still going to apply at Synnex. So as long as you're just sticking with those, you continue to grind, you pay attention to the execution, and just don't let the distractions interfere with your work. show your value, you're going to continue to thrive. And I guess my last advice to any leaders that are going through a merger acquisition is to plan early, plan often, and just make sure that you execute on those plans. But be prepared to alter the course, because the best laid plans are going to need adjustment.
Yeah, isn't that the truth? And Matt, I hope I'm free to ask this, but those 11 ground rules, would you share them with me?
Sure. Rule number 1 of my 11 are attitude governs altitude. And I've always been a big believer in that it's really your attitude day in and day out, not your aptitude. They're going to govern your altitude. Rule number 2, the John Brown rule. And I learned that in my IBM base camp decades ago from their top seller named Don Ovison, that came in and spoke to our class. And we were in awe of this guy because the rumor was he'd made $500,000 or $1 million, which is a lot of money at that time, top sales guy. And he said something that I wrote down that I never forgot. I call it the John Brown rule. It was 17 words. To sell John Brown what John Brown buys, you must see John Brown through John Brown's eyes. It's said a lot of different ways. You have to walk in somebody's shoes, et cetera. But it's really just all about, you have to listen more than you're out there talking. You have to take good notes. You have to ask a lot of questions. But I instill in my team the John Brown rule. That was number 2. Number 3 was set the bar. You got to set the bar, and then you got to exceed it. Number 4 was just make things work. Don't look for all the negatives, because we're all going to be able to find those. They're out there in any company, in any team, in any products or solutions. There's going to be some negative things that happen to you, but you've got to put those aside, and you just got to make things work, which really leads into rule 5, which is speak positively. Speaking positively about your company at every opportunity. I've got examples of how that could turn out. If you don't speak positively, it could turn around and really impact your sales. Rule 6 is act with initiative, as if it all depends on you, because frankly, at the end of the day, it really does all depend on each one of us. Rule 7 is earning trust. Earn trust. Trust is something you just don't ask for, and you can't force it. You got to earn it. You got to earn the trust. Rule 8 is do everything with enthusiasm. It's contagious. And then rule 9 is help each other win. Take pride in each other's victories. That kind of goes back to the culture that we talked about earlier, is that it's not all about one person. I've told my teams many times when I've put a target up in front of them that, guys, I can't make this target, but we can. It's a we thing. And rule number 10, don't lose faith, never give up. And then rule 11, probably one of the most important, have fun. Got to be some fun in your job.
Absolutely.
If you're not having any fun, tell you what, it's really going to come through to your customers. It's going to come through to your teammates. And you should go find something that you're more passionate about to have some fun.
Well, I say I am having fun learning from you. And I love the fact that you developed ground rules early. I think those are a great thing. You kind of keep them moving, and it allows everyone who works with and for you to know how best to be engaged with you. And I think that's the thing that people miss around ground rules. When you set them, you're telling everybody else, this is what you can expect from me as well.
Yep, you're exactly right.
Matt, just like with sports, I mean, sometimes business losses happen, right? And when they do, they require your team to come together. You got to break it down, analyze what happened, figure out how to become stronger as a result. And, at Synnex, how do you bring your team together to look at weaknesses, things that might have gone wrong, and emerge stronger?
Well, fortunately, Don, at Synnex, there's a great culture that inspires really good teamwork, good communication, and a lot of us hate to lose. Most of us that seem in leadership positions probably hate to lose more than we enjoy winning. So there's a wealth of information that Synnex has built over the years. They have a lot of custom software that every employee uses that helps analyze the information and metrics of their businesses. Everyone has a profit and loss mentality to run their businesses, to keep a sharp focus on the margins. And as an IT distributor, believe me, the margins can be really thin. So we have to operate efficiently. We have great systems in place to do that. All the execs in our company have quarterly exec meetings every quarter where we not only look back at how did we just do in that quarter and any adjustments or any losses we can talk through, but what's the next quarter going to look like? So we adjust and make plans for the next quarter going on. It's a mentality that's just ingrained in our leadership. So paying attention to the details really does work, because Synnex has now recorded 140 profitable quarters in a row.
OMG.
So when you do the math, over 30 years of profitable business in a row. So yeah, really proud that we do look at the losses, we take action, try to correct them. But there's a good culture that, let's win together, and it's a great place to be.
Wow. Well, to have a position like yours at a company as big as Synnex, it's time consuming, but there's been a lot of discussion over the years about how leaders manage work-life balance. And I know you have a wife, 3 kids. What advice do you give to others who are trying to maneuver in that space?
Well, my advice to them is the life balance act is tough. It's really tough, but you have to work smart. You have to work hard. But once that you are with your family, you have to be present. You can't be continuing to be engaged in work and have meaningful family time. You have to listen to what your family's talking about. You got to ask questions. And most importantly, you just have to be thankful that you have time with them, because in a blink of an eye, you think about your children and your family that might be challenging at the time or time consuming. They're all going to be over so quickly. Kids are going to turn into young adults, and those times that you miss because you were so piled into your work-life balance and it was tipped on the work side, those times you just can't get them back. So you can only look forward and go make some new memories.
I love it. I agree completely. And I cannot thank you enough for the gift of your time today, for the opportunity to learn from you, for the opportunity to learn from Coach Lister. That's the thing I love about these interviews and these conversations, is that I'm learning from those who taught you. And then hopefully together we're teaching those who are listening to us. Matt Karst, I appreciate you. I'm grateful to you. And I look forward to the next time our paths cross.
Yes, Don, and thank you for having me today. I really do look forward to seeing you in one of our events. And I'm going to leave with, I hope that any listener that gets the opportunity or is in a position that they want to make their upcoming event when this world returns to normalcy and we get back to actually having crowds and events in our business world. If any of those listeners have the ability to and want to really bring hard, great, well-liked stories to their team, there's an old adage that says, no IT manager ever got fired for buying IBM. Well, nobody in the events field or in the sales field that wants to hire a great motivational speaker is ever going to get fired for hiring Don Yeager. I'm going to leave it at that.
Wow. Well, on that high note, I'm going to say thank you. Thank you. Thanks for helping me put a bow on all of these lessons and the ways that the things you learned through sports helped influence the way you lead today. Matt, again, I appreciate you. I appreciate the Synnex team and culture. And as I said, I can't wait for our paths to cross again.
Thank you, Don. Looking forward to seeing you in the near future.
My favorite story from today's episode came when Matt shared how he did not get what he set out for, the starting spot on the high school basketball team. But he did not let his disappointment turn into bitterness. He adjusted his mindset, accepted his new role, and learned to be a great teammate. This is so important because there will be times in our life when we are not in the spotlight, when we do not get the starting spot. Will you be bitter, or will you embrace it to make your team better? Thanks for listening to the show. Did you like what you heard? If so, subscribe to the podcast. We will be rolling out a new episode every Wednesday, and you can be the first to listen. Subscribe on our website, corporatecompetitorpodcast.com, or by texting subscribe to 58885, and you will receive a free chapter of one of my best-selling books. While you're there, remember to join the Greatness community. For a free weekly leadership lesson, I write for Forbes.com and information on my live and virtual keynote speeches. Stay in touch by connecting with me on social media at Don Yeager on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. Finally, are you a corporate competitor? If so, tell me the story about a time when your athletic experience taught you a leadership lesson you still use today. Until next week, I appreciate you.